The bounty hunter had gold in his teeth and rot in his heart. He rolled into town with a pistol on each hip and a mean grin that showed he liked hurting people. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew he was there for blood. That morning, a beggar with a twisted leg asked him for water near the well. The hunter didn't say a word, just laughed, loud, ugly, sharp like a bone snapping, then spit on the ground and kicked the man in the ribs so hard folks across the street flinched. No one moved. Not the sheriff, not the storekeeper, not the preacher. The beggar just lay there, coughing up dust and shame. Billy saw it all from the saloon steps, chewing slow on a piece of jerky, eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. He didn't speak, just stood up, dusted off his coat, and walked toward the man everyone feared, not because he wanted justice, but because he knew what real humiliation felt like, and today he was going to teach it. Not with a bullet, not with a fist, but with something that'd stay with that bounty hunter long after the blood dried. Billy didn't walk fast. He didn't have to. The sound of his boots on the dirt was enough to make folks peek out from behind curtains and barrels, wondering if today was the day someone finally put the bounty hunter in the ground. The man turned when he heard the steps, still laughing, brushing dust off his fancy leather vest. "You lost, boy," he said, his hand already floating near his holster like it had a mind of its own. Billy stopped 5 steps away. He didn't look angry, didn't look scared, just calm, too calm. "You think you're big," Billy said, voice low, "'cause nobody's made you crawl yet." The hunter laughed again, louder now, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You one of them saints, come to protect the broken?" Billy took another step forward. "I ain't no saint, and he don't need protection. He needs you to remember what it feels like to be lower than dirt." The street got quiet. Even the wind stopped. The bounty hunter blinked, confused for just a breath. And that was enough. Billy moved faster than most men blink, not for his gun, but for the knife he kept behind his belt buckle. And before the hunter could even flinch, it was at his throat. The blade didn't press, not yet. It just hovered there, whispering promises the bounty hunter was starting to believe. Billy's hand was steady, eyes colder than desert stone. "You like pain?" he asked. "'Cause you're about to learn 1,000 ways it talks." The hunter tried to grin, tried to show teeth like a wolf, but his lip twitched and betrayed the fear boiling under his skin. "You touch me," he said, "and the marshals will string you up before sundown." Billy didn't blink. "I ain't scared of rope," he whispered. "I'm scared of men like you thinking nobody remembers what you done." He stepped back just enough to let the knife rest against the man's chest. "I saw what you did to that beggar. You kicked a man already on his knees. That ain't strength. That's sickness." The crowd that had started gathering didn't make a sound. Dust danced in the air like it didn't want to land. Billy nodded his head toward the cactus fields just beyond the ridge. "Start walking," he said. The bounty hunter shook his head. "You can't be serious." Billy just stared. "Crawl," he repeated, "or I cut." And for the first time, the bounty hunter looked around and saw no one willing to save him. The bounty hunter took 1 step back, then another. But Billy didn't move, just stood there like a gravestone with eyes. The silence hurt worse than a scream. Finally, the man dropped to his knees, hands trembling as they met the dry, cracked dirt. His pride shattered louder than any bone ever could. A low gasp moved through the onlookers, but no one stepped in. They knew better. Billy didn't punish for fun. He punished for memory. For justice, the law forgot. The bounty hunter's elbows hit the ground next. Dust caked his sleeves as he began to crawl. Each movement scraped skin. Then came the edge of the cactus field, a wild, endless stretch of needle and thorn, waiting. Billy said nothing, just followed behind, slow, silent, his shadow long and sharp under the sun. The first prick of cactus hit the bounty hunter's palm. He hissed, but kept going. "A mile," Billy muttered, loud enough for him to hear. "That's how far he had to limp after you broke his cane," and laughed. The man's breath came in broken gasps. Thorns tore his clothes, then his flesh. Still, he crawled. Because he knew pain was temporary. But crossing Billy the Kid, that lasted forever. Blood painted the sand behind him, a long red trail twisting through the cactus thorns. Each inch forward carved new cuts, filled his mouth with dust, and cracked his breath into sobs. The sun beat down like a hammer, but Billy didn't blink. He walked behind him, calm, cruel, and still. No gun drawn, no threats needed. Just silence. The kind that made men feel their guilt like weight on their spine. Up ahead, the townsfolk had started to gather, not cheering, not jeering, just watching. Watching a man pay the kind of price the law never charged. Billy's boots crunched slow beside the crawl. He leaned down once, just once, and whispered, "How many others you laughed at? How many you shoved in the mud and walked away clean?" The bounty hunter couldn't answer. His lips were too torn, his face too swollen, his hands were pulp. But he kept moving. Because something in Billy's presence stripped a man of his lies. All that remained was truth, and pain, and miles still to go. By the time they reached the halfway mark, the bounty hunter wasn't crawling, he was dragging. His knees were gone, nothing but shredded skin and bone grinding against rock and thorn. His breath came in rattles, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Still, Billy didn't lift a finger, didn't offer mercy, didn't blink. He just walked behind the man like a shadow with judgment in its eyes. A few folks from town followed at a distance now, whispering, some horrified, some nodding slow like they'd seen justice take a rare shape. An old man muttered, "Ain't no law for pride, but Billy makes his own." The cactus needles stuck deep in the bounty hunter's stomach now, his shirt torn away hours ago. His lips moved, begging, maybe praying, but no sound came. Just the rasp of skin against thorn. Billy finally stopped, kneeled beside him, and took off his hat. "You remember that beggar's name?" he asked. The man blinked, shook his head. "That's the problem," Billy said. "You never thought he had one." And then he stood. The mile wasn't over yet. The sun started to lean west, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts on the desert floor. Billy kept walking behind the bounty hunter, silent as death, his boots crunching over grit and thorn. The man had no strength left to scream. His hands were raw, his elbows bleeding, and every breath sounded like it hurt. Billy didn't care. Not yet. This wasn't just punishment. It was a lesson. And lessons, Billy believed, had to scar. Up ahead, a rattlesnake slithered across the path and vanished into the brush. The bounty hunter flinched like he'd seen the devil himself, but Billy didn't even look. He just pulled out a flask, drank slow, and watched the man try to keep moving. In town, folks were starting to talk, not about the cruelty, but about the order it brought. "Billy ain't a hero," someone whispered, "but he makes the world think twice before it spits on the weak." And that was exactly what Billy wanted. Not glory, not applause, just fear, in the hearts of men who thought kindness was weakness. The bounty hunter reached out toward a patch of shade. Billy shot a bullet into the dirt beside his hand. "Ain't no shortcuts," he said flat. "You crawl the mile." Every inch the bounty hunter whimpered like a dog kicked too many times. His lips were cracked, eyes swollen from sweat and sand. But Billy didn't blink. He stood still, boots planted like roots in the earth, arms crossed, watching. A mile of cactus wasn't just a stretch of land, it was a reckoning. Every thorn he dragged himself over was a memory of every man he'd cuffed too hard, every boot he'd used to crush a beggar's ribs, every time he spat on someone already on the ground. Now the desert was spitting back. He reached a patch where the cactus needles grew thick and mean, like knives. The bounty hunter froze. His breathing turned to shaking. "I can't," he wheezed. Billy squatted down, lit a match, and flicked it at a dry bush nearby. Flames sparked fast. "That bush'll catch, and the next one, and then the next," Billy said, calm as sunrise. "So either you burn, or you crawl." There was no heroism here, no mercy. Just a boy turned into a storm by a world that had no room for softness. And now that storm had a face, a name, and a rule. Spit on the small, and you answer to Billy. The fire crackled behind him, licking its way across the dry scrub like it had a grudge of its own. The bounty hunter screamed, then dropped to his belly and started crawling again, cactus needles tearing into his skin, drawing blood with every inch. Billy didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just walked behind him, slow, steady, like death on 2 feet. The townsfolk had gathered by now, quiet and wide-eyed, some clutching their children, others hiding behind saloon doors. No one dared interrupt. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice, raw and ugly, the kind nobody teaches but everybody understands. One old man whispered, "Ain't no law in these parts but the law of who's willing to bleed more." Billy heard it, didn't respond, just kept walking. Dust swirled around his boots like ghosts. The bounty hunter sobbed now, face shredded, shirt soaked in red, arms trembling. But he kept moving, because the fire was still hungry behind him, and Billy was still watching. And between those two devils, the cactus almost felt kind. By the time the bounty hunter reached the end of that cactus stretch, he wasn't a man no more, just a shaking sack of blood and thorns, breathing like every breath might be his last. His hands didn't look like hands. They were torn up meat, full of splinters and dirt, trembling like leaves in a storm. Billy stood over him, silent. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with blood and fire. Nobody said a word. Not the sheriff, not the preacher, not even the kids who used to think heroes wore clean boots. Billy knelt down, close enough that the bounty hunter could see the cold in his eyes. "That beggar you laughed at," Billy said, voice like a dry wind. "He used to be a scout, saved my life once, back when I still thought the world could be fair. You spit on a man like that, you better be ready to crawl." The bounty hunter tried to speak, but his mouth just bubbled. Billy stood back up. "Let him live," he said to the sheriff. "Let him explain why his face looks like that every time he tries to open it in town." Then Billy turned and walked off into the dark, like nothing had happened. But everybody knew something had, something big, something they'd never forget. That night the town didn't sleep easy. Doors stayed locked, lanterns burned longer, and folks whispered low, as if the wind itself might carry their words to Billy. The cactus trail was still there in the morning, soaked with dried blood and broken pride. And the bounty hunter, he was gone. Vanished before sunrise, leaving behind pieces of his coat and a trail of torn-up footprints that staggered toward the edge of the desert. But the beggar, he stayed. Sat in the same spot outside the saloon, quiet as ever, only now folks didn't step over him. They nodded. Some even handed him bread or a coin, not because they pitied him, but because they were scared of what respectless silence might cost. Billy had shifted something deep, not just fear, but order. Unwritten law, a warning carved not in paper but in flesh. And though no one said it out loud, they all knew the truth. Billy wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain either. He was balance. He was the weight that fell when the world got crooked. And when he showed up in your story, You better pray you'd been living straight. By the time the sun reached its peak, the dust had already swallowed the bounty hunter's trail. Sheriff Madley rode out that morning with 2 deputies, pretending it was just patrol duty. But everyone knew he was looking for what was left of the man. When he came back near dusk, pale and sweating, he didn't speak a word. Just tied his horse and walked straight into the church, stayed there till morning. The preacher didn't ask why, he already knew. Word spread fast beyond town lines, across dry creeks and barbed wire fences into the ears of ranchers, gamblers, outlaws, and lawmen alike. Billy had made a man crawl through a mile of cactus for laughing at the wrong soul. That kind of tale travels quicker than a bullet, and it carries more weight. In places where law meant little and mercy meant even less, Billy became something else entirely, not just a man with a gun, but a sentence, a consequence, a whisper in saloons and on prison walls. They started calling him the Thorn Judge, not because he preached, but because if you mocked the broken, he'd break you worse. And as the nickname Thorn Judge grew legs, so did the fear. In towns where bounty hunters once swaggered with silver spurs and cruel mouths, they now stepped quieter. Men who used to kick beggars out of doorways started offering them scraps instead. Not out of kindness, but out of survival. Nobody wanted to be the next to crawl. Stories leaked out of places Billy had never even been, as if his spirit traveled faster than his boots. One tale told of a drunk who mocked a blind man in Abilene and swore he felt a blade graze his neck in a dark alley later that night, though no one had seen Billy within 100 miles. Another spoke of a sheriff in Missouri who spat on a girl with no shoes, and the next week found his horse dead and his badge melted into the dirt. Whether true or not, these stories did their work. Billy didn't have to be there anymore. The myth walked ahead of him, clearing the way, bending men before his shadow ever reached the door. Billy watched it all from a distance, not with pride, but with that cold calm he always wore. He never asked for fame. He never wanted to be legend. But if people feared him enough to stop tormenting the weak, then maybe the legend served its purpose. Still, he didn't sleep easy. The desert has a way of whispering back the things you try to forget. At night, with only stars and silence for company, Billy would sit by the fire, listening to coyotes howling like lost souls, and wonder if he'd gone too far. The bounty hunter had begged, screamed, bled like a stuck pig, and Billy hadn't flinched. Was that justice? Or had he just become another kind of monster, one with a better excuse? But the fire never answered. It only cracked, flickered, and burned. The next morning the sun rose without shame, baking the sand and bones alike. Billy packed his things in silence. He didn't talk much, especially after a night like that. There was no one to talk to anyway. Just his horse, his gun, and the memories riding behind his eyes. Before leaving, he rode past the trail of blood, Cactus torn up and bent like something out of a nightmare. The bounty hunter was gone. Whether he crawled away or got dragged off by buzzards, Billy didn't care to know. That chapter was closed. But the people in the nearby town, they'd heard. Word spreads fast when justice is strange and cruel. Some called Billy a demon, others a savior. And both kinds stepped out of his way when he rode in. At the edge of town, a little girl stood barefoot in the dust, holding a torn doll with no eyes. She looked up at Billy, not with fear, but with something else, something like understanding. Her father had been the beggar. He sat now under the saloon's awning, his legs still wrapped in bloody cloth, watching Billy with a quiet nod. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Billy tipped his hat just a little, then rode past them both like a ghost slipping through the heat. He didn't stop for thanks, didn't want applause. Justice, for him, was never about feeling good. It was about balance. And the world, as he saw it, had a lot of debts left unpaid. News of what Billy did spread faster than wildfire in dry brush. By sundown, every saloon from Dust Creek to Broken Ridge was buzzing with the tale of the bounty hunter who'd crawled through Cactus on his belly, crying like a child, with needles stuck so deep in his skin they said even the undertaker flinched just hearing about it. Some folks laughed, some stayed quiet. But the ones who knew Billy, the real Billy, they didn't smile. They just shook their heads and muttered, "He don't play." Because deep down, even the worst men in the West understood one thing. When you laugh at the broken, when you spit on someone already down, you're not just picking a fight with the weak. You're inviting the wrath of someone who remembers what it felt like to be there. And Billy, he never forgot. Billy didn't return to town right away. He rode off slow, like he always did after settling a score. Hat low, boots dusty, heart quiet. Folks said he camped out by Devil's Ridge that night, just him and the stars and a bottle of rye. Some swear they saw him staring into the fire, whispering to it like it held the voices of every man he'd ever punished. Maybe it did. Maybe that fire knew the weight Billy carried, the weight of being judge, jury, and the kind of executioner who never took a man's breath, only his pride. And in a land where bullets talked and lawmen lied, that kind of justice was the only kind left. By the next morning, word had spread like wildfire. Not just through the saloon or the dusty streets, but across counties. Billy made a bounty hunter crawl through a mile of cactus, they said, and every time the story was told, the cactus grew longer and the beggar's tears got bigger. But the truth was already enough to haunt any man who thought cruelty made him strong. That bounty hunter, he didn't just lose his pride, he lost the respect of every soul who heard the tale. And Billy, he didn't care much for fame, but he did care about silence. The kind of silence that settles over a town when even the cruelest men know there's someone out there meaner than them, but only when it's deserved. Billy rode out that morning slow, the sun behind him casting a long shadow across the dirt. He didn't look back, didn't wave, didn't say a word. Just tightened his grip on the reins and let the desert take him. Folks stood quiet on their porches, hats in hand, eyes low, not out of fear, but respect. The beggar, now bandaged and resting, whispered a prayer for him. Not because Billy saved him, but because Billy reminded the town what justice looked like when the law turned its back. Out there, beyond the hills, Billy disappeared into the dust again. But everyone knew, wherever cruelty laughed too loud, Billy would be close behind, silent, watching, waiting for the next soul who needed to be reminded what pain felt like. By the time the bounty hunter crawled his last inch through the cactus bed, his hands were raw meat, face swollen, boots shredded to nothing. The man who used to swagger through saloons with a smirk now whimpered like a child, lips trembling with every breath. Billy didn't gloat. He didn't grin. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching like a man who'd seen too much to find joy in revenge. The crowd that gathered didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They stared in silence, like they'd just witnessed something ancient, something more spiritual than violent. A reminder that some laughs cost too much, that you don't mock a man with nothing left, because sometimes someone like Billy hears it. And when he does, no badge, no gun, no fame will be enough to protect you. The sheriff finally arrived, a few minutes too late, dust still clinging to his boots. He looked at the trail of blood and cactus spines like a man who had just walked into a church after the sermon was over. Billy didn't move. He didn't need to. The sheriff didn't draw his gun, didn't speak tough. He just looked at the bounty hunter crumpled in the dirt, then looked at Billy and said, "That necessary?" Billy's eyes narrowed. He made fun of a man with no food, no legs, called him desert trash, and spit in his cup. "You tell me, Sheriff, what part of that don't need correcting?" The sheriff didn't answer. He just nodded slow, like maybe justice ain't always about law, and walked away. By the time Billy walked back into town, word had already spread like wildfire through the saloons and back alleys. Folks didn't see a gunslinger that day. They saw something older, something colder. A mirror that don't blink. People stepped out of his path, not out of fear, but respect soaked in silence. The beggar, still sitting with cactus thorns on his lip and tears drying in the sun, raised his hand as Billy passed. Billy didn't wave back. He just tipped his hat, slow, like closing the last page of a book nobody ever wanted to write. And with boots crunching dry dirt, he disappeared down the road again. Not a hero, not a villain, just the weight of balance, walking away. If you want more stories where justice don't ask permission, hit that subscribe button and ride with Billy through the dust. Billy didn't say much after that day, but something in him had shifted. Not softened, no. Billy didn't do soft, but steadied, like a storm that knew exactly where to strike next. He rode with the sun on his back and shadows clinging to his boots, and every town he passed through felt it. A hush in the wind, a question in every man's throat. Was that him? Folks who used to laugh too loud, cheat too quick, or spit on the wrong soul suddenly found their manners again. Not out of goodness, but because they knew. Somewhere out there was a man who didn't just settle scores. He rewrote the meaning of them. And he did it without flinching. Billy stopped riding for a moment at the edge of a ridge that overlooked the valley where it had all gone down. The sun was setting like a fire on the horizon, and the wind carried that dry, dusty silence that only comes after something irreversible. He didn't smile, didn't scowl, just watched. Down there, the cacti still stood, quiet, sharp, eternal, like witnesses sworn to secrecy. Somewhere beneath them, blood and pride still soaked into the dirt. Billy lit a match, not for a cigarette, but to watch the flame flicker against the wind. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but it was his way of saying, I remember, not out of regret. Billy didn't do regret either. He just knew that some lessons needed to be carved deep enough to scar the earth. The flame burned down to his fingers before he dropped it. He didn't flinch, just let it fall and watched it vanish into the dirt. Behind him, the horse shifted its weight, restless. Billy turned slowly and climbed back into the saddle like he wasn't carrying the weight of justice twisted into something colder. He didn't look back, not at the trail of thorns, not at the town that had turned its eyes away, and not at the broken man who used to laugh at the poor. Billy didn't care for applause. He rode for balance, for messages the law was too afraid to deliver. And this message had been clear. Mock mercy, and you'll meet justice wearing spurs. The wind picked up as Billy rode through the open plain, stirring dust like whispers from the past. The sun was sliding down the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Each hoofbeat echoed like a warning, steady, final. He wasn't heading anywhere in particular, but folks knew what it meant when Billy rode alone after sunset. It meant someone had learned the hard way that cruelty wasn't free. In the saloons and farms and back alleys of the West, people started talking. Not loud, not brave, but quiet, like prayers or secrets. Did you hear what he did to the bounty hunter? Made him crawl, a whole mile, through Cactus. Said he laughed at a beggar. Said Billy didn't like that. And just like that, towns started watching their own, not out of goodness, out of fear. In the next town over, a man with blood on his boots and silver in his teeth tried to make a joke about it, about Billy, about the cactus, about the beggar crawling like a worm. But no one laughed. One woman stood up from her chair and left her drink behind. One man dropped his hand from the gun on his hip. Even the piano stopped playing like it didn't want to be part of it. Because the story had changed something. Not just about Billy, about what kind of men the West would tolerate now, the kind that kick the fallen, or the kind that kneel to lift them. Billy didn't preach. He didn't write letters or laws. But he left messages anyway, on faces, on scars, on the trail of fear and respect carved behind him like hoofprints in sand. They say the bounty hunter never spoke again after that day. Not a word, not a whisper. His tongue healed, but something else didn't. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was whatever a man loses when he's forced to crawl through his own cruelty. Folks in nearby towns started calling that stretch of desert the Mile of Shame. And no one, not even the roughest gunman, dared laugh at a beggar again. Because if Billy was around, and he always seemed to be, you'd end up paying in skin what you mocked in spirit. Some say Billy rode off that evening without looking back, his horse slow, his eyes steady. Others say he left a silver coin beside the beggar's hand, a kind no bounty could buy, but enough to start over. Maybe that was his way of saying, I don't fight for the poor. I punish the proud. And in the silence that followed, in the wind that brushed the cacti still dripping blood, folks didn't see a bandit. They saw a reckoning on horseback. If that story made your spine tighten or your heart pound, maybe it's because deep down, we all want justice to look like Billy. Stick around. We got more tales that make the West feel honest again.